or something that's like a little driving game that I just started there. I just let them play for the first time.
I say,
I think they've played it a few times, but there were studies that that I've read that I thought were convincing about children and flat media, where it is not about the content. These are kids under the age of 2 that to really limit or to keep away completely children under the age of 2 from any kind of like flat screens. And it's not about the content. It has to do with exposing them as much as possible to things that they can touch and see in 3 dimensions. And I think that's really interesting that those studies said it didn't matter what the content was on the television screen or the computer screen. So it's not about like show for children under 2. And so I think that when we think about media for kids, sometimes we're thinking so much. Again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just talking as an individual, but as a parent. But we think a lot about the content. Of course, content's really important, but other things to think about too are what are they interacting with? What kind of tactile things are they doing? And then also, what are they doing in terms of like how fast-paced is it, or is it slow-paced, and things like that?
Well, of course, Professor Landay is also an accomplished scholar, a published author. I realized that we have about 2 minutes left.
Ooh,
it's incredible.
So
now I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce us to her books, to her articles, to her future projects, and to the connections that she has quite successfully established between the virtual world and the educational culture at Berklee College of Music.
So my recent book is called I Love Lucy, and it focuses on the television series I Love Lucy, and it's a book that puts that TV series in its cultural context. So it is really the first book to have a lot of focus on what happened in the 1950s. It has a lot of detail about the production context and about the creation of the situation comedy, about the camera setups and things like that. So it was really fun to write. I've been researching I Love Lucy since I wrote my first book, which was called Madcaps, Screwballs, and Con Women, The Female Trickster in American Culture, that has a chapter on I Love Lucy and also on other topics in 19th and 20th century American culture, including screwball comedies and flapper films. And so the research I do focuses primarily on comedy and that kind of thing.
I have always said, as I spoke about African Ascent, how honored I am to have a vigilant, attentive, interested viewers. Given that, what I'm going to ask Professor Landay to do is to say something to my viewers. I think so highly of them. They are so important to African Ascent. What kind of message would you like to pass to the viewers whom I feel are really intrigued by this notion of the virtual world?
I think one thing to really think about is right now we think about keyboards and screens and computer mice as the way that we interact with computers and networked technologies. But to think about what comes next. What happens when we're not using so much of the keyboard, but it's much more touch screen and voice-activated commands? What happens when the web does become more 3-dimensional and interactive? What would it be like to have an avatar that could do online shopping, for example, rather than pointing and clicking and doing that kind of thing? What would that be like? What would it be like to talk to your Facebook friends in that kind of a way? It's something to really think about. What's the future? What's next? What do you want to see happen next?
Well, as you can see, the exploring the technological imagination of the human species is endless. What Professor Landay has done for us tonight is really introduce us to what I think is a very promising and infinitely rich technological future that she and her colleagues are committed to explore and then bring research to us. I must thank my guest for being a special guest of African Ascent. This has been your host, Dr. Theodoros Kiros for African Ascent. Good evening.